Libra woman, the lover of balance and beauty. Episode 1, The Fire That Scorched Her. Chapter 1, Spark in a Room of Noise. The hotel bar hummed like a beehive, clinking glassware, a DJ testing bass, a hive of name badges and practiced smiles. She, a Libra with a velvet voice and a habit of balancing her wine glass exactly on the coaster's circle, had come for conversation, not combustion, but combustion found her anyway. He arrived with a laugh that didn't ask permission. Aries in motion, shoulders back, jaw carved by perpetual momentum, a presence that cut through the crowd the way a speedboat cleaves a lake. "You're standing where the light loves you," he said, as if the world owed him heat and somehow paid on time. She half smiled. "Or maybe I found the light." A game began before either of them agreed to play. They circulated together, their orbits tightening. He asked questions too quickly, then pushed for bolder answers. "What scares you? What do you want but won't admit?" She parried with grace and curiosity, refusing to be cornered and yet curious about the corners. When a venture capitalist bragged about crushing a competitor, Aries leaned in to whisper, "He's confusing victory with value." She startled at the accuracy. She liked minds that moved, his moved like a wildfire. They stepped outside for air. Warsaw's evening hung damp and electric, city lights smearing along wet pavement. He stood too close, not a threat, just a demonstration. She felt her pulse notice him, as if her body had been politely waiting for permission to feel. "You hesitate," he said gently, eyes scanning her face. "You weigh things until the scales rust." She bristled at the accuracy and the arrogance. "And you leap without looking," she answered. His grin said she'd landed a point. They shared a cab because that's what stories do when they're eager to become themselves. In the backseat, conversation took the shape of orbiting hands, of glances that lingered a second too long. He told her he'd left a job that tried to make him small. She told him she'd stayed in one that tried to make her safe. "I want to be braver," she admitted, the words surprising her as they arrived. "Good," he said. "Bravery looks excellent on you." At her building they paused. The air between them felt calibrated to a near kiss. She could sense the heat, the magnet pulling her forward, but Libra loved the ceremony of choice. She paused to choose. "Not tonight," she said softly. "Soon," he promised, and the word landed like a match. She watched the taillights recede and for once didn't second-guess. She had not invited chaos, but she had not refused it either. In bed, the city still whispering at her window, she realized her breath carried smoke. Chapter 2, Speed Limits and Green Lights. He texted at 7:04 a.m., "Coffee or courage?" She replied, "Both." He sent a pin, not a question. She arrived to find him already mid-argument with the barista about which grind brought out the roast's honesty. She laughed, and the argument became a lesson, and the lesson became a flirtation that left her latte cooling untouched. Aries lived in verbs: run, build, climb, dare. He suggested an impromptu afternoon climb at an indoor gym. She had a meeting. He suggested rescheduling the meeting. She suggested reality. He kissed her cheek, then her jaw, then stopped with a restraint that felt like a promise he intended to keep only until dusk. Their first date that wasn't became a night that was. Dinner spilled into rooftop drinks, city a necklace of lights at their feet. He touched the inside of her wrist, discovered her pulse the way one discovers a doorway. "You're thinking again," he murmured. "I am," she said. He smiled. "Think this, I'll catch you." The words both soothed and threatened. She had spent years catching herself. The first time they made love, it happened between laughter and a door that didn't close fast enough. Clothes forgotten like unimportant questions. His hunger was immediate, hers rising like tide. She led as much as she followed, meeting his urgency with intention, guiding the rhythm when it galloped, softening it when it needed breath. They found a pace that was theirs, not only his. When they finally collapsed, the city still drummed below, and she thought, "We're loud in a way I've never let myself be." Days accelerated. He took her on a night ride through empty streets, his motorcycle purring, her arms wrapped tight. She tasted wind, fear, youth she'd filed away too early. "You're safe," he shouted over the engine. "For now," she shouted back, and meant both the road and the relationship. But even in euphoria, she noticed edges. He ordered for both of them without asking. She smiled, then changed her order. He introduced her as the one who gets me to a circle of friends she'd just met. She winced at the pressure disguised as praise. He was late to dinner, unapologetic because the story of why was exciting. She accepted the story and archived the lateness. Balance required ledgers. She caught herself keeping one. One night he sent a photo, sunrise at an office roof he'd snuck onto, captioned, "Come see the city when it blushes." She loved the line, the hue, the boyish trespass. She also loved her sleep, her schedule, the presentation she'd led. She texted back, "Tomorrow." He responded with a flame emoji and the words, "Always tomorrow with you." She typed, "Because I like to arrive ready," and deleted it. She typed instead, "Soon." She slept badly. They were already heading toward an intersection neither had the patience to map. He accelerated toward green lights. She slowed at yellow. Neither was wrong, both were certain. Chapter 3: The Art of Argument. The first real fight began as a joke. He teased her about how long it took her to choose tiles for her bathroom renovation. "You deliberate like a Supreme Court justice," he said. "You demolish like a wrecking ball," she replied. They laughed, but the joke had edges, and edges cut when handled too often. He wanted a weekend trip decided in 20 minutes. She wanted to browse, compare, delight in the ritual of choosing. He proposed Montenegro, then Prague, then somewhere with cliffs. She opened 3 tabs in a spreadsheet. He groaned theatrically, kissed her neck as if that could bypass the step of thinking. She did not melt. "Desire can wait," she said. "Desire gets colder," he argued. They postponed the trip and kept the fight. In her kitchen, she laid out her values like silverware: consideration, mutuality, the grace of asking. He responded with fire and first instinct, with the poetry of boldness. "You're mistaking chaos for courage," she said. "You're mistaking caution for wisdom," he shot back. His voice rose, hers didn't. That only escalated him, as if calm were a verdict against passion. He left, slamming a door he'd left ajar on purpose so he could reopen it. She didn't follow. She lit a candle she used when untangling thoughts. The flame steadied, her hands didn't. She was not used to being yelled at by someone who claimed to adore her. In past lives, anger meant leaving. In this one, it meant testing whether love could hold a charge without burning the house down. He returned with tulips, messy, bright, imperfect. "I don't want to win," he said, breathless from stares and pride. "I want to not lose you," she softened, because apologies were her native language. They made up with touches that translated what words failed to. Later, she lay awake wondering why apology felt like a word she had to carry more often. The second fight arrived disguised as sex. He reached for a tempo that galloped. She wanted slow. She said so. He adjusted, then drifted back to his pace like a runner, forgetting they were tandem. She paused, hand on his chest, eyes searching. He registered the pause and saw it as rejection, not request. They separated without speaking. "You think I don't listen," he said, finally, wounded. "I think you believe passion excuses you from listening," she answered. The silence after was a cliff both refused to dive from. They built a cycle: blaze, ash, bloom. Between fires he was tender, boyish, a man learning the choreography of consideration. Between blooms she was daring, laughing too loudly at a street musician, trying on red she'd always avoided. Each gave something up to meet the other. Each quietly tracked the cost. One afternoon he arrived with a spontaneous plan, a pitch he wanted her to join, a risk that made her mouth go dry. "It's not my field," she said. "It's your life," he said, meaning, "Be big, be loud, be with me in motion." She looked at him and felt love and the tug of a self that preferred to land before leaping. Love is often a negotiation between altitudes. They were flying at different heights. Chapter 4: Fault Lines. They tried a pact: he would count to 5 before pushing. She would choose without asking for 3 more options. It almost worked, the way a dietary cleanse almost recalibrates without addressing hunger. For a week they were gentle. They walked along the Vistula, shared a single set of earbuds, traded songs like secret handshakes. In the hush of near winter, they felt like a promise that might behave. Then came the dinner with his friends, a table built for debate. The conversation spiraled into truth versus harmony. He loved truth as a torch, she loved truth as a bridge. "Peace without honesty is just silence," he declared, eyes sparkling at the spark. "Honesty without care is just noise," she replied. The table cheered the rhythm, but he heard it as defiance. He raised his voice, not at her, but near her. Her heartbeat climbed the stairs to her throat. In the taxi home, he accused her of predifying conflict. She accused him of performing bluntness as a virtue. The driver turned the radio louder, mercy and melody. At her door, he said, "You care more about peace than truth." She flinched at the sentence because it grazed a fear she kept hidden under rugs, that her devotion to balance sometimes blurred her boundary with appeasement. She swallowed. "And you confuse volume with truth," she said. He blinked, as if someone had thrown water on the fire. They didn't sleep together that night. He left with fists in his pockets. She stayed with a notebook and a pen. She wrote, "What if compromise is not surrender but choreography? What if he never learns to count to 5? What if I stop counting and jump?" The questions made a small tent over her bed. She slept underneath them and dreamed of bridges that swayed but didn't fall. Morning brought bouquets of text. "I'm sorry I'm hot-headed, you make me better, let me try again." She wrote back carefully, "Try slower." They met at noon, walked through a market, let ordinary things remind them they were just 2 people choosing fruit, not 2 archetypes staging a debate. He bought cherries, put one behind her ear like a rose. She laughed in spite of herself. That night they were gentle and slow and almost wordless, a hymn of presence. After he whispered, "I don't want to scorch you," she whispered back, "I don't want to disappear." They lay there, 2 vows breathing, neither sure how to keep the other. But fault lines don't vanish because you trace them. They wait, and sometimes they shift when you think you're safe. Chapter 5: Smoke Signals. Work intensified. He chased a deal that promised altitude. She led a project that required meticulous, invisible excellence. Their calendars stalked them. He texted late, come out. She replied at deadline. He wrote, you live on deadlines. She wrote, you live on cliff edges. They were both right, both lonely inside their righteousness. He took to dropping by without warning, flooding her apartment with heat and momentum. Sometimes it worked, a whirlwind dinner, a quick escape into laughter and hands on hips, his mouth at her shoulder where she was most ticklish. Sometimes it didn't, papers fanned across the table, her spine set to precision, him a storm she couldn't let in. One evening he arrived flushed, triumphant, buzzing with a story about a rooftop after-party. Names she didn't know, a DJ who made the skyline throb. She asked who hosted. He said a new client, smiled with a brightness that made her stomach feel like a swing. Who? She asked, steady. He told her and added casually, she's brilliant, I might be a little in love with her brain. He meant to tease, to draw out her laughter. Instead, she stared at the cherries in a bowl, pits the color of small endings. You flirt recklessly, she said. I speak freely, he replied, and kissed her as if punctuation could replace revision. The kiss did its work until it didn't anymore. A week later, he canceled dinner. Work thing, he said. She believed him because trust is partly choosing which stories to house. 2 days later, another cancellation, then silence, then a message at 1:12 a.m. You awake, she was. She tried not to catastrophize. She practiced her scales, balance, benefit of doubt, breathe, and yet she felt the temperature shift in rooms he wasn't in. Instinct is a smoke alarm you can learn to live with, or you can get up and find the fire. On Friday, rain stitched the city together. She left work early, a rare rebellion. She bought his favorite pastry and decided to surprise him. She rehearsed what she'd say, I need consistency. I need you to choose me on purpose, not as an afterthought with fireworks. She wanted love that was bright and also kind. Her umbrella warred with the wind as she buzzed into his building. In the stairwell, she heard laughter, a woman's, glossy and unguarded. She paused, because pausing was her instinct, and because her heart had begun to write a sentence it feared it would have to read. Chapter 6. The door she opened. His apartment door wasn't latched. She knocked anyway. Silence. She turned the knob, whispering his name the way you whisper into a room you assume loves you back. The living room was a quilt of clothes, a jacket she didn't recognize, a heel tipped on its side like a question mark, his t-shirt forming a careless horizon along the sofa. A candle burned low on the coffee table, its wax spilling in uneven drips, romantic, if it hadn't been for the wrong hands lighting it. From the bedroom came the unmistakable sound of bodies, not the sound of tenderness, but the rhythm of forgetting consequences. It was laughter first, then a sound that used to belong only to her. She froze and then moved because freezing would shatter her. The pastry bag slipped from her hand, a soft thud that felt indecent in its gentleness. Strawberry filling bled through the paper, a small domestic wound on the hardwood floor. She didn't see everything, she saw enough. Silhouettes in the mirror, the outline of his back bent toward someone who was not her, his hand where her trust used to be, the vulnerable music of a stranger's pleasure, his voice raw with a kind of joy she'd thought was theirs alone. Her body reacted before her mind caught up, heart slamming, breath refusing, stomach folding into itself. But she didn't storm, she didn't make a scene. There was a kind of power in her restraint. She stepped backward until the hallway remembered her as a passerby. The door clicked softly, a courtesy it did not owe her. On the landing she sat, spine straight, palms flat against the cool step. The rain had followed her indoors somehow. She could feel weather under her skin. The building smelled of damp wood and old apologies. Her first thought was not rage but arithmetic. How many small dismissals had added up to this? The late replies, the distracted kisses, the way he'd started complimenting her clothes as if reading from an old script. Her second thought was an old survival, be gracious. She rejected it. Grace was not a shield against disrespect. It was a gift, and gifts shouldn't be demanded. A neighbor passed her and paused, sensing something raw in the air. She smiled, a polite mask, the kind women learn young. I'm fine, she lied, because grief often wears manners. When the footsteps faded, she let her smile fall away. Her phone lit with his name, a message, babe, can you give me a minute? She stared until the screen dimmed, then pressed the power button until the world went dark. It felt like closing a curtain on a stage she no longer wished to perform on. She walked out into the rain without her umbrella. The night met her like a witness. The city made room for her grief, the way cities do, indifferent and consoling at the same time. She passed couples under shared awnings, their laughter slicing through the storm. It stung, but not because she envied them, because once she'd been that sound. By the time she reached the river, her coat clung to her like wet paper. She leaned against the railing, air sharp with wet metal. Water churned below, mirroring her pulse. She didn't cry loudly, she didn't narrate, she let her breath count seconds because counting was something she could control. A tram crossed the nearby bridge, lights gliding like thoughts she couldn't stop thinking. When she finally returned home, she showered the smell of his apartment out of her hair. She scrubbed until the scent of betrayal thinned to soap and exhaustion. She stripped her bed and remade it with clean sheets, the ritual a small insistence on sanctuary. She made tea she didn't drink. The steam curled up like questions she couldn't answer. She sat at her desk, pulled out a blank page, and wrote one sentence: "Passion without respect is poison." She looked at it until the words steadied. Then she underlined respect twice. He called, she didn't answer. He called again, then knocked at midnight, rain-drunk apology clinging to him like a coat. Through the peephole he looked smaller, deflated by his own choices. She opened the door just enough to see his face, eyes frantic, mouth rehearsed. "It meant nothing," he said, as if meaning could absolve consequence. The sentence fell between them like broken glass. "It meant something," she replied, voice steady, "because it means we're not the same story I thought we were." He reached for her, desperate for contact, for rewinding. She stepped back. He argued the way he did everything, intensely, immediately, as if speed could undo the fact of what had happened. Words tumbled, excuses, promises, panic disguised as remorse. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't need to. Her silence was structure, not surrender. She held up her hand. "Leave," she said. He hesitated. "Please." "Leave," she repeated, quieter this time, and that quiet was the door closing for good. He did, not because he wanted to, but because his wants had forfeited their vote. When the hallway emptied, she leaned against the frame and let the last of his echo fade. Then she turned off the light and went to bed alone, clean and unbroken, in a way she hadn't been for months. Chapter 7: After Fire. Grief rearranged her apartment. She moved the chair where he used to drop his jacket. She put the cherries bowl on a higher shelf. She changed her lock, a practical act that felt ceremonial. She told 2 friends, the ones who didn't audition solutions but simply came over with blankets and let silence sit with them. He texted paragraphs that collapsed into pleas. He wrote about loneliness, about fear, about how she made him feel like the best version of himself and how he'd wrecked it like a reckless driver in a borrowed car. She drafted replies she never sent, then sent one: "Please stop contacting me." He stopped for 3 days, then began again with "I miss you" typed like a reflex. She muted him and wrote in her notebook instead. She returned to the river. The city looked the same, which felt like insult and comfort in equal measure. She switched her phone to airplane mode and walked until dusk grew its edges. She remembered their rooftop, his promise to catch her, the way she'd believed safety could ride pillion behind danger. She forgave the self that believed. Forgiveness, she discovered, was not a pardon for him but permission for her to stop replaying. At work she excelled. Precision was a balm. She redecorated her bathroom and chose tiles in 20 minutes, laughed crying when the clerk complimented her decisiveness. She started a pottery class. Clay responded to patient hands. She took herself on dates, museum mornings, solo dinners where she ordered exactly what she wanted without translating desire into compromise. Balance returned not as avoidance but as alignment, spine over hips, truth over peace. He appeared once more in person, months compressed into a single knock. She opened the door because closure sometimes requires a witness. He looked smaller, as if the fire had consumed kindling he couldn't regrow. "I'm sorry," he said, the words finally quiet. "I believe you," she replied, surprising them both, "and I'm done." He nodded, a lesson finally learned too late. "You made me want to be better," he said. "Then be," she answered. It wasn't cruel, it was the most generous version of goodbye she could offer. That night she lit the same candle she'd used for untangling thoughts months before. The flame held steady. She whispered to the room, "I stayed with me." The room, delighted, whispered back in the language of stillness. Chapter 8: The Bridge She Built. Spring leaned into the city with green insistence. On a bench by the river, she read a novel and let the sun make a ceremony of freckles. A stranger asked if the seat was taken. It was. He didn't announce himself as anything, not a sign, not an archetype, not a test. He was just a person who sat down and didn't try to rearrange the air. They spoke about nothing that mattered and everything that did: favorite bridges, the honesty of old trees, the pleasure of choosing tiles without committee. He laughed easily and asked, before reaching for anything, even the book's title. She noticed the question marks, how they made room. She noticed her own answers, how they didn't contort to please. She didn't leap, she also didn't hesitate to the point of rust. She offered her number, he offered his. They parted like 2 pedestrians crossing a street at the same moment and smiling at the choreography rather than insisting on having the right of way. That evening, she wrote one last page in the notebook that had tracked the rise and fall of a fire. She didn't romanticize the burn or sanitize the hurt. She made a list titled What I Keep: my voice, my pace, my standards, my laughter, my tenderness for someone who meets me at my altitude. She added, my love of balance, not as fear of conflict, but as devotion to fairness, including fairness to myself. She placed the notebook on a shelf and opened a new one. On the first page, she drew a simple bridge and wrote, truth with care, care with truth, passion with respect, respect non-negotiable. When her phone buzzed, it wasn't a plea, it was a question. Want to see the city when it blushes tomorrow? She smiled, thinking of rooftops and trespasses, of past promises that had scorched. She typed back, yes, at sunrise on the pedestrian bridge. Bring coffee. I'll bring the playlist. He replied, deal. She closed her eyes and listened to the soft machinery of a world that kept going. Trams, footsteps, the kettle she'd left warming. She didn't confuse calm with emptiness anymore. She recognized it as room. Room she'd made by walking away when someone mistook her balance for weakness, her compromise for surrender, her quiet for consent. At dawn, the bridge threw gold across the river. She arrived on time, not early to please, not late to test. He waved, coffee in hand. They walked to the middle where wind gathered and let go. She pressed her palms to the railing and let the city blush around them. First rule, he asked, half teasing. First rule, she said, smiling, is that we listen. Second, we don't yell. Third, if we disagree, we don't turn it into a performance. We build a bridge, not a bonfire. Deal, he said again, and the word felt like a seed planted rather than a fuse lit. She took a breath that felt like a Chapter B, act, not an ending, not a beginning. A balanced step forward, steady and self-kept, toward a story that would never ask her to trade peace for truth or truth for peace. Again. Like this video, subscribe, more stories like this are coming.